Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority on Monday, 6th of December 2021. I'm Mayor Bet Thomas and Chairperson for this evening's Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting. Joining me in chambers this evening are my fellow Planning Authority members, Alderman Simon Fraser, Alderman Angela Ryan, Alderman Jan Dunsby and Deputy Mayor Stephen King. The Planning Authority, I need to note and acknowledge that we meet tonight on the land of the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. Acknowledge the Palawa people as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. The Planning Authority intends to act as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993. And the Planning Authority has full power to make planning decisions on behalf of the Council. Apologies this evening. We have apologies from Alderman Kelly Sims. And I'll note our meeting procedure for this evening. So our planning officer will present the assessment and recommendations and then answer any questions that Alderman may have in relation to the application and the officer's presentation. I will then invite the applicant and any interested parties to have their say by addressing the meeting. Our speakers will be limited to 5 minutes in which to address the authority. The chairperson may ask the planning officer to comment on any matters raised by the applicant or representative. The planning authority will then discuss the application. Planning authority will then decide on the application, and our senior statutory planner, Vanessa, will explain appeal rights. When deciding an application, the authority is required by law to seek to further the sustainable development objectives of the Land Use Planning and Approval Act, consider representations received during the public notification period, and make the decision by reference to the current planning scheme provisions. Our meeting rules are pretty simple. Please comply with any direction given by the chairperson, and please respect other people's views and their right to have their say. Work health and safety here at council is really important, and we consider very significantly the health and safety of council elected members, staff and members of the public who visit our facilities here. I will also note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to Facebook. So any members of the public who do address the authority this evening need to be aware that this meeting is recorded and you may appear, or at least your voice may appear on the recording and the live stream to Facebook. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda, which is pecuniary interests. I will declare a perceived interest in item 5 because I have a close relationship with the applicant this evening, so I will step out for that one. Any other pecuniary interest for any agenda items this evening? No? Moving on to item 4, confirmation of the minutes. So we have a recommendation that the minutes of the Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting held on 8th of November 2021 be confirmed. Do I have someone to move? Move to Alderman Dunsby.
Can I ask for an alteration to the minutes before they're moved, please? On page 26, in relation to a matter regarding St Virgil's College, it has that 4 aldermen voted for that motion. I actually voted against it, so I'm just wondering, it won't change the decision, but I think it's been incorrectly recorded, so I just want to note that I actually voted against that particular item. With that corrected, I'm happy to move the minutes.
Okay. Vanessa, are we able to note to have that amendment made to the minutes? Yep. Okay, so you move the amendment to the minutes and then move the minutes. Alderman Dunsby, someone to second. Deputy Mayor, any further discussion of the item? No? I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. Carried unanimously. Moving on to item 5, which I've declared an interest in, so I will hand over to my very capable Deputy Mayor to chair the meeting and ask that you let me know when the item's been decided.
Well, there's the thing. We'll come and get you, I guess. That'll be good. Item 5, proposed use and development, outbuilding residence 6 Dalton Court, Glenorchy. And I think our planning officer's Sylvia. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair.
You're up there. Good.
Thank you. So the proposal is for a double carport that will be 0.5 meters from the front boundary and 3.2 meters in height. Have the next slide, please. So the subject property is located on the northern side of Dalton Court, and the carport will be located in front of the dwelling. Next slide, please. So the zoning is general residential. The carport is in association with a single dwelling, which is a permitted use in the zone. Next slide, please. But the application is discretionary for the front setback. As I said, the front setback will be 0.5 meters. The acceptable solution that triggers the discretion requires a front setback of 5.5 meters for a garage or carport, unless the dwelling has a floor above the garage or carport, or the existing ground has a slope with a gradient steeper than 1 in 5 for a distance of 10 meters from the frontage. The latter two of the acceptable solution are not relevant. So the discretion is a garage or carport for dwelling must have a setback from a primary frontage that is compatible with the setbacks of existing garages and carports in the street, having regard to any topographical restraints. I'm going to show the side photos first and then talk some more about the discretion. So this is the subject site where the two cars are parked. So the carport will go in front of the garage and pretty much over the cars. Next slide, please. This is looking back onto Nagle Place, and it just shows sort of, you can see where the existing houses are located. It's worth noting in the street there are no garages or carports forward of the dwellings. Next slide, please. And this is showing back into the cul-de-sac. Again, you can see where the cars are parked. So the proposed carport will pretty much go over where the cars are. Again, this shows perhaps a little bit more clearly what the existing setbacks are within the street. So there's no garages and carport forward of the houses, and the houses themselves are all at least 4.5 meters setback from the street. It is worth noting there's a 2 meter wide nature strip next to the footpath. So not all of the grassy area is part of the property's land. So there'll be an extra 2 meters there, but still that would only be 2.5 meters for the carport. Next slide, please. So this shows the red lines show where the general setback is within the street. As I mentioned before, there aren't any carports or garages forward of the existing setbacks, and neither are any of the houses anywhere near 0.5 meters from the front boundary. So there's no topographical constraints, and like I said, the setbacks are fairly uniform within the street. So as such, the proposal actually fails to comply with the performance criteria, and also obviously doesn't comply with the acceptable solution. So, so the recommendation in this instance is actually for refusal, and the grounds for refusals are that the proposed carport fails to accord with the acceptable solution in clause 8.4.2 A2 setbacks and building envelopes for all dwellings, as it does not have a setback from the primary frontage of 5.5 meters, and subclauses B and C do not apply. Then in terms of the performance criteria, the proposed carport fails to accord with the performance criteria in clause 8.4.2 P2 setbacks and building envelopes for all dwellings, as it does not have a setback from the primary frontage that's compatible with the setbacks of existing garages and carports in the street, and there are no topographical constraints. It's also worth noting there were no representations for the application, and yes, for those reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sylvia. My panel members, any questions for Sylvia?
Yeah, I do.
Alderman Bryan.
Thank you. Just to clarify, is it the The setback should be 5.5 metres, but this carport would result in a setback of only 0.5 metres. Is that correct, Sylvia?
Well, in terms of the acceptable solution, that's correct. So it doesn't comply with the acceptable solution because it doesn't have a setback of 5.5 metres. However, the council may consider a lesser setback if it is compatible with the setbacks in the street of existing carports and garages.
Okay.
And this, so in the first instance, it fails to comply with the acceptable solution, which then an application can rely on a performance criteria. But the assessment found that it doesn't comply with the performance criteria either, but they may ask for something less than 5.5.
Okay, thank you. Was there any negotiation with the applicants? Was there any room for the applicants to make the proposal smaller than in the application?
Yes, I did talk to the applicant about it, and we did give him the opportunity to respond through further information requests. But the problem is that there's just simply not enough room, or you can't really make the carport any shorter because otherwise the cars won't fit. So there's nothing really that was put forward that would make the situation any different, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, Sylvia.
Further questions? Alderman Dunsby.
Yeah, I'm struggling a bit with this one, and the commentary that just because there isn't any other in the street, that it can't be there. So hypothetically, if this one was approved, a neighbour could get it and not have to go through that justification that it's not compatible in the street. So I'm struggling to get my head around that. Whereas, you know, if in the future someone else in that area got it granted, that argument would not then apply. We're talking about an area that's a court, it's a dead-end area, it doesn't have a lot of through traffic. We can see the vehicles already sitting there in that context. A carport is, so they're already protruding sort of into the front of the house, and also a carport sitting above it is not going to cause a visual thing as a garage would. So I'm just, I'm struggling with the concept that that's one of the arguments we've got on this particular matter tonight, and I'll wait and hear from the applicant before I might comment further. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Dunsby. Any further questions? I've got a question, Sylvia. Just regarding the nevertheless the proposed setback is only 0.5 metres, and even with the nature strip, the carport would be only 2.5 metres from the edge of the footpath. Which side of the footpath are we talking about? The gutter side or the inner side?
The inner side. So their front backway is actually going back to where the flower bed is on the next door neighbour's property. So I guess I was sort of trying to sort of say, you know, whether, although this is strictly not the criteria, I mean, you know, but maybe the impact would be slightly less when we consider there's a nature strip. But however, it still would only be 2.5 metres, and it is still there wouldn't be any other carport forward of the building line, I suppose. But yes, there is part of the grassy bit is actually council land.
Right, but it is, so it makes it 2.5 from the inner side of the footpath, if I understood that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Even though it's council land, and I assume, we'll ask the proponent that later whether he mows the lawn. Okay. Just the other question was along the line of Alderman Dunsby. It does surprise me that a criteria would be no existing carports in the street would stop something when somebody else could be first. Is there a reason for that, or is it just that's how it is? Well,
I guess, yes, that is how it is. Sometimes you can get a building that was forward, I guess, of the building line because it was prior to the planning scheme, or because they had a secondary frontage, so they could have a carport that's closer to the boundary or something like that, or there might be something else already forward, like I said, because of the planning scheme might have been different at the time when that carport was built. But yes, once Yeah, once there is a carport in the street that's forward, I suppose one can take that in consideration when making any future applications, but that's not what we're looking at the moment.
Okay. I guess my question was more around someone being first.
Yes.
Someone's always got to be first, and I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but anyway, I guess that's the right.
Yes.
Chair, you can do that sometimes, but such is life. There are no more questions from the panel at the moment?
Not at the moment.
No, could the applicant please step up to the plate? Or the applicants, or who have we got?
Stella Muir.
Stella Muir, would you like to take and tell us, you're from obviously from that address?
Yep.
Take a seat, please, and speak up. I'm pretty aware that you can, so.
Basically, first of all, I was shocked at how much work had to go into doing this. People put carports up all the time. I'm in the process of buying a new car, and I thought, you know, you're spending that sort of money on a car. We've only got one single garage. We can't fit two decent cars in there. So I said to my husband, we'll put a double carport up. With global warming and everything else, hail, damage to the cars, all I'm trying to do basically is protect our investments. And we've also got grandchildren now, so when you're putting 2 or 3 children in and out of your car when you're looking after them, if it's raining or whatever, it's just, you know, not good. And basically, as you say, somebody needs to be the first, and I just felt that, yes, I agree there has to be rules and regulations, but I feel that we're slightly discriminated against because we live in a cul-de-sac. If I lived in Main Road, Glenorchy, Chapel Street, Springfield Avenue, one of the largest streets, I could probably meet the criteria of the setback. But unfortunately, I can't. I mean, I have to abide by whatever decision's made, but I just feel I'm not don't want a solid structure. You'll have 2 posts at the front, 2 at the back, and a roof over the top. Clear vision. Where we park our cars now, we parked them there for 30 years, basically.
Well, we hope it's pretty solid. We don't want to blow away. But nevertheless.
That's what I'm saying, you know, but we've lived there for nearly 30 years in that house, and we just want to basically protect our cars.
Okay. Committee members, any of you got a question for Mrs. Muir?
No.
No questions?
Right. And now what they were saying about the 3 metre, change it from 5, we originally wanted 6, but then we realised 5.5 is close to the boundary. It wouldn't even cover half the cars, so it's a waste of time.
Understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
No worries.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time. All right.
Thanks.
So we have a motion. The applicant for the proposal use development at 6 Dalton Court, Glenorchy, be refused for the following reasons. 1, the proposed carport fails to accord with the acceptable solution in clause 8.4.2, A2 setback, and building envelope for all dwellings, as it does not have a setback from a primary frontage of 5.5 metres, and subclauses B and C do not apply. The proposed carport fails to accord with the performance criteria in 8.4.2 P2 setbacks and building envelopes for all dwellings, as it does not have a setback from primary frontage that is compatible with the setbacks of existing garages or carports in the street, and there are no topographical constraints. I love that word. Do we have someone to move the motion?
I'd like to move an alternative motion if
Alternative
it's possible,
motion.
Chair. So I'd actually like to grant approval for this particular item. I think that we have the ability under the clause 1 to, that's why we're here, for the discretion. And I think that failing the performance criteria in 8.4.2 P2 is pretty tough on this particular applicant. The vehicles are already there, they'll be staying there, so the visuals won't change, it will just be the structure that'll be in the front. And, you know, this could be one of many, but it sets a precedent, and I find that a very difficult reason for them not to have it. So I'd like to change that the recommendation is that it's approved now. That will probably need to go through a process through you, Vanessa, with all the conditions and things that might be with that. So I'm not sure whether you've got something that's prepared, but I'd like to see a recommendation where we actually approve it. So that's what I'm moving, but I don't know the wording and how we go about it.
Can you help us out with some wording there, Vanessa? Do I need to get a seconder first before we go to that trouble, or not trouble. But
So we have prepared an alternative motion.
this is like a cooking show. Sorry.
So you can hand it out.
Thank you. And we certainly didn't know about this in advance, but this is our staff. They're brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so the proposed alternative motion would read, conditions for approval, that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of a carport at 6 Dalton Court, Glenorchy, subject to the following conditions. 1, planning. Use and development must be substantially in accordance with the planning permit application number PLN-21-513 and drawing submitted on the 12th of the 10th, 2021, except as otherwise required by this permit. Engineering, the loading and unloading of goods and including the building materials and equipment from vehicles must only be carried out on the land. Soil and water management is to comply with the best practice to prevent any transfer of soil material outside the area specifically and necessarily distributed for construction. Particular attention to be paid to ensure no soil material is tracked onto roads and footpaths and to enter the council stormwater system. All aspects of protection measures in connection with the soil and water management are to comply with the requirements of council's development engineer and be installed prior to the removal of and or disturbance of any soil or vegetation. And advice to the applicant, which I'll read out given that this motion goes ahead. So
Excuse me, Chair, may I interrupt?
you have, yes, go ahead.
The first condition should also refer to plans on the 4th of the 10th, 2021. The 2 different dates on the plans in the attachments.
Yes, I guess you can't have something, oh yeah, okay, so it's the 4th of the 10th, was it?
At both.
4th of the 10th and the 12th of the 10th.
4th of the 10th and the 12th of the 10th.
Yep.
Okay. Do we need to change this? Are we good with that, Vanessa? You've got to change that. Thank you.
Yes.
So we have an alternative motion. Do we have a seconder? So we have a second, Alderman Fraser. Thank you. So Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. I've possibly rated what I think around this. It just seemed quite unfair that, that the people are trying to do the right thing and go through the processes and to hit this brick wall on something that, is something that hasn't happened in their street. It's a difficult planning scheme that we often deal with. We sit here and often pull our hair out, but we have to follow through the regulations. But I can see that we have got movement on this one. I believe the applicants have gone through the right thing. I don't think it will be a serious impediment visually in the area. It's only going to sit above the cars that are already sitting there. I hear the applicants' need for that in terms of protecting the car and also their getting in and out of the car with children. That's obviously something that we don't consider, but it's going to be useful for them in having that development there. Outside of that, I'd like to throw it open to the panel members should they wish to speak.
Any other questions, panel members, or discussion points?
I'll just say briefly,
Yes.
in as much as the planning authority has the discretion to refuse or permit the application, and in as much as this is a carport, not a garage, so it's not a substantial building, and because it's a carport, that means there's clear vision for traffic and pedestrians in the street. I'm happy to support
The motion.
the new motion.
Alderman Fraser, any questions?
Happy to support the motion, obviously. I did second it. It does set a precedent. I certainly recognise that, and I certainly understand why the planning officer initially recommended that it was refused, because they are following the planning scheme and the performance criteria. It does not meet the performance criteria, but as my fellow aldermen have said, this is just a carport, and I guess the main issue of concern there is visibility, and I don't think it's going to present an issue for the street.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. Just like to add, just a question for Mr. Muir, if I could. Do you maintain the lawns out the front there?
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank
the
you.
whole lot, even the nature strip that I didn't know was your property.
Thank you. Okay, look, tend to agree with my fellow alderman here that this is a benefit to the household and not really a detriment to the community, and I don't think it's going to be, well, as we say, we've got clear vision, and aesthetically I think it won't affect the community in any way, and there's always going to be someone who's first and always someone who's going to be last, so I'm comfortable with that. So based on that, we need to vote on this motion. So, back to the mover, any further?
Nothing further. I think that everything's been said that I feel reflects the need, where we've come to with making this particular recommendation. And I also thanks of the officers for bringing all the information before us.
Yeah, so thank you to the officers for that. It's certainly not a reflection on them.
No.
Although all those in favour of the motion, the new motion, if they please show by the applicant's hand. Thank you. Any opposed? Obviously not. Vanessa, do you want to read out the advice to the applicant?
I can do that if you like, yes.
I can, but I figured, do I or do you?
Well, you can if you
All right,
like.
I'll do that then. I can do that. So, some advice which you'll be sent by our planning officers. This advice does not form part of the permit, but is provided for the information of the applicant. Other permits. Please be aware that this planning permit is a planning approval issued under the Glenorchy Interim Planning Scheme 2015. You should consult with an accredited building surveyor prior to commencing this use or work to ensure all relevant requirements of the Building Act 2016 are complied with. In addition to this planning permit, a building permit and/or plumbing permit may also be required. If further application is required, please contact Council's Building Section on 6216-800. Underground services, the designer must ensure that the needs of all providers, including Tas Water, Tas Gas, Tas Networks and Telstra, are catered for, both in the design and construction of the works. Underground service providers should be contacted for line marking of their services and any requirements or conditions that they have prior to commencing any works on site. Phone 1100, dial before you dig, or visit www.dialbeforeyoudig for information on the location of underground services and cables in relation to the proponent's development prior to the commencement of any works on site. Thank you very much. Anything from you, Vanessa, before we pass on?
No, other than to say that the application's now been approved.
Yes.
Yeah, so the applicant does have a 14-day appeal period if they wanted to appeal the the approved conditions. And it's not to commence within that 14 days unless the applicant notifies council otherwise. Thank you.
You good with that, Mrs. Miller? But if you don't like our approval, you can. It's not.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. You might go and get the mayor then. All right. Yeah, no, we better go. We're still going. No, you can give me an assist. Just for your information, the last one was actually approved rather than disapproved.
Right, okay.
So
No,
here's your book back.
much. Okay, so moving on.
It's 4.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 6, which is proposed use and development for lot subdivision and balance at 2 Turnbull Crescent, Rosetta, 63 and 65 Radcliffe Crescent, Rosetta. And our planning officer presenting to us is Sylvia. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So the proposal involves the creation of 4 lots. The main property to be subdivided is 65 Radcliffe Crescent, which is vacant, but has an easement of 11 metres wide. The property at 2 Turnbull Crescent that contains a dwelling would have a boundary altered to add land to one of the lots, and the property at 63 Radcliffe Crescent will be affected by the installation of a sewer main within the right of way. So access to lots 1 and 2 will be from Radcliffe Crescent, and access for lots 3 and 4 will be from Turnbull Crescent. Next slide, please. So this shows the subject site that comprises the 3 properties. Next slide, please. The land is within the general residential zone. Subdivisions are usually permitted if they comply with all the acceptable solutions, but there's a discretion for this one in terms of lot design. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we have discretion for the lot design. The acceptable solution requires a building area of 10 times 15 with a grade less than 1 in 5 that accords with all setbacks and is clear of easements. The proposal generally would comply with the acceptable solution, except with respect to side setback on lots 3 and 4, which is shown in this figure with the red arrows. So they haven't got quite 1.5 metres for the setback for the building envelope. The discretion requires that each lot on the proposed plan of subdivision must have sufficient usable area and dimensions suitable for its intended use, having regards to the relevant requirements for the development of the building and the lots, the intended location and building of the lots, the topography of the site, the presence of any natural hazards, adequate provisions for private open space, and the pattern of development existing on established properties in the area. I'll talk about the discretion now before we go to the side photos, because it's just easier to see it on the actual plan. So the acceptable solution, so the proposed building areas are considered large enough to accommodate a dwelling, and it is noted that there will be additional area outside the building areas available also for construction, so they wouldn't have to be strictly confined within the building area. They could actually move it a little bit. The building areas which are taken to be the intended location of buildings are free of easements, restrictions, planning scheme overlays, or potential hazards. And the building areas have a grade no steeper than 1 in 5, so that there are no topographical constraints. There will be sufficient area on each lot to provide for private outdoor space, and the proposed building areas will be consistent with existing development in the area, in particular building areas roughly aligned with existing front setbacks in Turnbull Crescent and Radcliffe Crescent. I'll go now to the side photo so you can see where it's all situated. So this is looking from Turnbull Crescent. This is the majority of the site. Next slide, please. So this shows the property at 2 Turnbull Crescent. So it's proposed to add the area where the grass and the shrubs are to the left of the car parking area to one of the lots. So the new boundary will sort of run along the car parking area. Next slide, please. So this shows the subdivision from the bottom of the subdivisions from Radcliffe Crescent. You also see the existing house on top of the hill, and where there are some bushes in front, that's where it is proposed to have a sewer easement to connect to the subdivision. I believe there's one more slide. So we did receive a representation. The representation was concerned about information that was received with the application. They say that no information was received about the application and wanted to be kept informed in the future. General information about the application was available during the advertising period. The plans were available from Council's website, along with all the application documents available upon request. Furthermore, the application was notified in accordance with statutory requirements. The applicant will need to be in contact with the representatives to obtain written permission for sewer works to occur on their land as part of conditions imposed by TasWater, and may provide further information at the same time. It's also my understanding that the surveying firm was in contact with the neighbour during part of the application process and gave them some more information. So overall, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the recommended condition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sylvia. Do any authority members have any questions for Sylvia about this report? We don't have the applicant or the representative here with us, I believe. So if there are no questions, we have a recommendation before us that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 2 Turnbull Crescent, Rosetta 63 and 65 Radcliffe Crescent, Rosetta, subject to 18 conditions. First one to move the recommendation, please. Alderman Ryan, number second, Deputy Mayor Alderman Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. I just briefly, I think this is fairly straightforward. We need more housing. So I think this is a great proposal. Yes, the lot design proposal doesn't accord with the acceptable solutions with respect to the side boundary setback for lots 3 and 4, but I'm satisfied that it provides sufficient usable area for the building, for the dwellings. So I'm happy to support this recommendation, subject to the conditions.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Any further discussion of the item? To speak in support of this recommendation, we have one discretion in relation to lot design, and like Alderman Ryan, I'm satisfied the performance criteria are met. We received one representation. We note the concern that was raised there, but it sounds like it was a concern around perhaps lack of understanding or information that the representative had rather than any concern about the actual proposed development. So I'm quite satisfied with the information we've been provided in relation to that. There's no further discussion. I'll go back to Alderman Ryan.
No, nothing further from me, thanks.
The recommendation to the vote, please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Planning Authority have decided the application and it's now been approved. The applicant and the representative will be notified and will have 14 days to appeal that decision if they choose to. And the development cannot take place until that appeal period is finished.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, proposed use and development, 10 multiple dwellings at 21 Coleman Street, Moona. And our planning officer is Chantel, who is joining us via Teams this evening. Over to you, Chantel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you go to slide 1, the subject site, so this site is proposed to transition from its former use as a warehouse to residential use. If you go to slide 2, the zoning map, so you can see here Coleman Street is within the inner residential zone. However, it backs onto the light industrial zone in Chapel Street. So if you go to the 3rd slide, so the site plan includes 10 two-storey dwellings ranging from 2 to 3 bedrooms with one access off Coleman Street. So if you go to slide 4, okay, so this is view looking directly at what is on the site at the moment. So there was a previous approval for that building to be demolished, and that will be done obviously prior to this development. The proposal was advertised and we did receive 7 representations from 9 representors. There was a wide range of issues raised, and for assistance I've separated them out in the report for those that are relevant to this assessment at the moment and those that are separate issues that will be covered under different legislation or may be considered separately by different areas of council. So if you go to this slide 5, so this shows the neighbouring accesses. You can see the vehicular access as they are at the moment. So the relevant issues raised for this planning assessment regard the building envelope, driveway visibility, dwelling density, increase in traffic, pedestrian access, privacy, and the scheme clarification. So if you go to the next slide, number 6. Now this is probably the main one in terms of how the street operates at the moment. So this is looking back at St. Therese Primary School, and you can just see the existing gate for the proposal on the left-hand side. So the applicant provided shadow diagrams to address the performance criteria for units 7 and 8 that were outside the building envelope. And this showed that the whole proposal would satisfy the amount of sunlight required on neighbouring sites during the winter solstice. Now, if you go to the last slide, so number 7, so this just looks back on the other side of Coleman Street. Now, the reason I'm showing both sides of Coleman Street is because there were a large number of concerns raised about existing traffic on Coleman Street, as well as visibility and access. For this reason, we, as in council staff, council's development engineer, myself, we asked council's transport engineer to have an additional look at this application for the purpose of taking on the concerns raised in the representations and looking at them as a separate matter going forward, looking at Coleman Street in the future, as well as having a look at how the concerns relate to the proposal. So we do
I'll
have
just
some
pause
additional.
you there for a minute, Chantel. You've just
Yes.
gone really quiet for some reason.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I don't know if you moved away from the.
Is that any better?
Yeah, that's better. Yep, thank you.
My apologies.
That's okay.
So we included council's transport engineer in this proposal at this stage to have a look at two separate issues, one relating to the planning application and one relating to Coleman Street and the existing traffic. So council's engineer was supportive, provided there was a condition requiring visibility through the proposed front fence near the new access, the widened access. And there were several issues raised as well where the proposal complied with the acceptable solution. This included density, dwelling density, and privacy for neighbouring properties. So this is a situation where we have an application before us and we're required to assess this application in relation to the planning scheme. However, I would like to acknowledge and have done so with several representatives that there are issues that they raised that can be addressed or have a look at by our council's transport engineer under a separate process. So this is not the final step in terms of some of the concerns they've raised. And I just wanted to make that clear to yourselves and any representatives who may be present that we have taken those concerns separately, seriously and separately, but unfortunately we can't address them, all of them, in this application. So this proposal has a number of conditions attached to it to ensure that parts of it do comply with the acceptable solution and some of the issues raised, and it is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Chantel. Do Planning Authority members have any questions for Chantel?
No question, just an observation. I've never seen that street so vacant. I go down it fairly regularly, dodging in and out of cars, and I just, no matter which way I look at it, I've never.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We do have the applicant and the owner here with us this evening, Mr. Richardson and Mr. Ahrens. Would you like to address the authority this evening? Come forward.
Sorry about that.
That's all right, you're right.
Stepping on my legs. Yes, we've been looking at this development for over 3 years, and as Chantel said, that it was previously a commercial site. It was been a commercial site for many, many years, and it's now, of course, in a residential, which under the regulations for an inner residential, it's one residence for 200 square metres. This property is just under 2,200 square metres, so therefore we were permitted to, under the planning scheme, to provide 10 units. Provided part of that, of course, it makes it a requirement that we have to provide a certain amount of open space, the number of car parking, various provisions, things like wheelie bins and all the landscaping requirements, and we believe that we have done that. We've worked with the council in a few questions that they've come back to us about, and we've addressed them. A good example of that is concerns for the adjacent property at number 17, Coleman Street. They have some concerns about overlooking of their private open space at the rear, and units numbers 8, 9 and 10, which are the relevant units that look over that. There are bedrooms on the top level of those units. Down below, it's only a living area and garage, and it was concern of the bedrooms at the rear of those units that they were overlooking the private open space. My developer is quite happy to make obscure glass in all those windows, including the bedroom windows, because all we're trying to do is get the light into those rooms. So the privacy of number 17 has certainly been addressed. With respect to the properties on the northern side of the development, we believe there's enough separation, and in most cases there's private open space of the units 1 to 3 and then 4 to 7 have got their private open space between the building and the boundaries. So there's separation there, and they're all separated with screen fencing. With respect to car parking, as you can see on the drawings, all the car parking provisions are within the site. There is no provision for external street parking, so all residents and visitors will be able to park on the site. Coleman Street is a through street, and yes, there is traffic does come and go through there between, say, Moona and the Springfield Avenue, but I think the street is certainly wide enough, and it's in particular, this development will not be putting any restriction other than the additional vehicle movements in and out of the site. As you saw on the photos, there is an existing crossover there, it's 5.5 metres, and we'll be utilising that same crossover to access this site. A few things that we did address were shadow diagrams. We've proven that all the adjacent properties have their minimum of 3 hours sunlight between 9 and 3 in the winter period. They all achieve enough sunlight for that under the regulations. We also there were some concerns about the amount of stormwater, and we've had an engineer report provided as part of the conditions that was asked by the council, and we had an engineer design the stormwater infrastructure for this site, and it certainly will be drained a lot better than the present drainage on the site. Sewer and water have been approved by Taswater, and so we've complied with all the requirements in that area. External services, there's been some concerns there. Some of the dividing walls between the units are going to be tilt-up concrete panels, and they will be rendered. And there will be also colour-bond metal weatherboards put on the external surfaces, and you'll see that reflected on the elevations. And there are also some weatherboards that will come from Hardy's. The traditional weatherboards of timber will not be utilised on this site. I think it's generally what we're looking at doing. The units themselves are all going to be stratum titled. They will be sold. The developer will probably keep 1 or 2 of them. And just to give you an example, each of them have been designed to take a lift. So we're looking at a higher echelon of attraction to people. As you know, lifts are quite expensive. They're in the order of $25,000 to $30,000. And the level of finish on these units are going to be reasonably high quality. So our intention is to, certainly draw on the way the market is at the present time, and provide a best quality development as we can. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Richardson, is it? Yeah, thank you, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you.
We have a couple of representatives here this evening. We have Hannah Krishman and Colin and Dot Pilgrim. Ms. Krishman, would you like to address the authority this evening?
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Richardson. I think you've answered quite a lot of my questions already. Just wanted to clarify what kind of boundary fencing you'll be using, because we're residents on one of those boundary properties there and wondering about that. Is that something that you can comment on?
The existing paling fences some of them are dilapidated. They will be replaced as part of the development, and there'll probably be a contribution between parties, but there is intentions that the fences will need to be certainly upgraded. A lot of the fences have been there probably for 30 or 40 years, so they do need some attention.
Yeah, and so that's something that will be discussed later on?
Correct.
Okay. When is work planning on being started, like if everything goes smoothly?
If we get the approval tonight, and we will be going straight into doing working drawings, and I would suggest that probably by the end of February, March next year, it's going to take 2 or 3 months to get working drawings and getting all the appropriate approvals. So I would suggest that in the second quarter of 2022.
Second quarter, okay, yep, and expecting it to last how long?
The units are proposed to be built in stages, but I would suggest that, what, 12 months?
First 3, maybe let's go to 18 months, 2 years by the time we finish on it.
Until
Okay.
they're completely finished.
Yep. All right, I think. Yep, anything else?
Can you clarify on the lifts? You say, so what, they're designed to have lifts put in, or they will have lifts?
They have the area allocated in the drawings, and it will be up to the people purchasing whether they want to pay an extra $25,000 to $30,000. We will probably be putting one in a display unit. We're looking at possibly unit number 9 being a display, and that will probably have a lift where you have access to a lift at the present time. But it's not finalised yet.
Okay.
So in terms of the visibility coming up the driveway on the 23 Common Street onto Common Street itself, so there's enough, will be enough. Buildings will be set back far enough from Common Street.
Yes, they are. They're set back the minimum of 4 metres. It's between the front of the unit and the curb. I would suggest is about 7 to 8 metres. So you think of the normal vehicle, plenty of, and with 5.5 metre width entrance, that allows for double cars to pass each other.
Yep. And in terms of the proposal for the stormwater pumps that's going in, during that huge storm the other night, I was thinking to myself, okay, what happens if the electricity goes out? Are those pumps going to keep working?
There's no stormwater pumps required.
Okay.
There is possibly a sewer pump down at the back of number 7, if we could have the drawing up, because the bottom corner of number 7, which in the northeast corner, is low. We believe we can plumb to if you go between 3 and look at between 3 and 4, the sewer line leaves there and goes down north between the 2 properties adjacent, and we're hoping that we can meet that, but it just we've actually done floor levels and we believe we can meet it. If there's a pump required, it'll only be for number 7. All the sewer, that's the sewer, all the stormwater is really covered by a large council main that runs near the entrance right back into the property behind.
Okay, so the stormwater will be flowing towards the driveway down the middle.
The commercial, yes,
not
correct.
back onto the other properties.
It's going into the driveway.
Okay.
With special treatment for filtering them, which is under the requirement the council provided, requested through our engineer design.
Okay. Anything else? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, you're welcome. Mr. and Mrs. Pilgrim, would you like to address the authority this evening?
This is an interesting exercise wearing this, if I may say so, but anyway, the hearing impaired have to deal with these things. I'll read what I've written because that's the easiest way to be sure I cover everything. As you said, this is my husband Colin and I'm Dorothy. We own 17 Coleman Street and units 8 to 10 of this development are adjacent to our shared boundary. I understand that the members of the Planning Authority have received Colin and my full representation, so I'll try not to waste too much time going through all of that again. We appreciate the external design of the units is in keeping with the residences in the area and that the internal layout and planning landscaping may appeal to more affluent home purchasers and investors, therefore lessees. We are hopeful future owners, lessees will maintain their dwellings, the nature strip and street access, and this will encourage other homeowners and lessees to do likewise, turning Coleman Street into an attractive residential street sought after by prospective homeowners. Although we know the Planning Authority cannot consider our loss of view, we would still like to express our disappointment. We are grateful the proposed development will resolve the unkempt view from our living room windows, which overlook the rear of 21 Coleman Street. However, we are extremely disappointed that our panoramic views across Dumont direction, Otago Bay and beyond will be lost. This view has been mine since I could first appreciate a view as a very young child in the 1950s. I have spoken to the applicant, Mr. Brian Richardson, and we discussed two matters. Building materials. Colin and I were concerned that timber weatherboards were to be used on some of the external walls and in a few years become an eyesore from lack of maintenance. Mr. Richardson assured me that cladding such as hardy weatherboards is to be used, and we're very grateful for that. Regarding privacy, as noted in our representations, there is an inconsistency on the plans. Plan level 2, units 8 to 10, doesn't show unit 10's level 2 bedroom window as obscured. That is, there is no asterisk. Whereas the plan named elevations 2, units 8 to 10, showed it as obscured. Mr. Richardson confirmed that all level 2 windows of units 8 to 10 are to be of obscured glass, which will preserve our privacy both in our home's living area and the rear yard. In our representation to Council, we requested that a condition be included that obscured glass be in situ for the life of the building. Recommendation 3 of the report summary seems to only make the permanent privacy screen condition a requirement for the bedroom on level 2 of unit 8, not the bedroom on level 2 of unit 10. From the plans, it's a little difficult to determine to what extent our living room privacy will be compromised, but was level 10's level 2 bedroom, being 3 metres from our shared boundary, it is reasonable to assume it will be if obscured glass is not in place. It would therefore be appreciated if recommendation 3 could be amended to ensure the use of permanent obscured glass is for all windows on level 2 of units 8 to 10. We are also concerned that recommendation 3 could be open to interpretation, whereby some other form of privacy screen could be constructed on or near our shared boundary rather than an obscured glass window, or some other form of privacy screen away from the window. We would appreciate clarification that this is not the case and would recommend that or request that any references to privacy screening be dropped from recommendation 3, stipulating only that obscured glass be in place for the lifetime of units 8, 9 and 10. We appreciate that some other matters we raised in our representations, such as potential traffic and waste issues, have been referred by the Planning Department to other council officers for consideration. We have appreciated the guidance we have received from Chantal Griffin and the information provided by Mr. Richardson. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further to add, Mr. Pimble?
No. I'm just here as part of the hearing aid.
Sure, no worries.
Here's my interpreter.
Great. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Who presented this one? Chantal, would you like to address anything that has been raised there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you like, I can discuss condition 3 if the applicant is agreeable to amend it. First of all, as the planning officer, this is a technical report.
I can't hear you again.
That better?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I'm bound by the planning scheme to put forward a recommendation. So the recommendation is only for Unit 8, the one which requires it as part of the planning scheme. The way the condition is written is that the requirement for screening is on the elevation, the facade of the building, up to a height of 1.7 metres from finished floor level. So it will not be on the fence, it will be required on the facade. Now, if the applicant is agreeable, and we can certainly consider amending the condition to include the bedroom windows for units 9 and 10. So it's something where the applicant would need to be agreeable because it's outside the requirements of the planning scheme.
Okay.
8, 9 and 10, please.
8, 9 and 10, yes, 8's already in there, yep. Mr Richardson, what?
Yes, well, that's what I addressed earlier.
Yes,
As far as we're concerned, the obscure glass will be there forever.
okay,
It's part of, and if, say, for instance, someone who buys the unit changes the glass, the occupants of number 17 have the right to go to council and say, planning approval stated obscure glass, and that would be the case, because of course the developer would not be responsible in 5 years' time. It would be the owner of the property, and if they suddenly decided to do this, and this happens quite a few developments I've been involved with, and it's just throws it back onto the planning.
Yep, thank you.
Through you, Chair, if I can just clarify, we are amending that condition 3 to include units 8, 9 and 10.
It's correct.
Yep.
There's a window in each bedroom, 3 bedrooms, and there are toilet and bathroom windows as well. They'll all be obscure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further, Chantel?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there anything further you'd like to add, Mr Richardson, in response to anything raised there?
I have a question.
Sure.
For the representative, with regard to condition 3, I think you mentioned something in the condition might be open to interpretation. Could you just clarify which bit that is?
If I repeat what I said, we're also concerned that recommendation 3 could be open to interpretation whereby some other form of privacy screen could be constructed on or near our shared boundary rather than an obscured glass window or some other form of privacy screen away from the window. On that recommendation, it actually refers in the first instance to privacy screen, and then in brackets it says obscured glass. And so we're just looking into the future that a new owner may choose to try and do it differently and say, well, I don't want the obscured glass, let's put something up against the fence. And that's where we're coming from in that.
Okay, so what
Also looks at the finished floor level, but it doesn't say which floor.
Yeah.
So it could be the first floor or the ground floor from 1.7 metres. So it's
Okay. With regard to the privacy screen in brackets obscure glazing, would it be more acceptable to say privacy screen consisting of obscure glazing, so that then it's not
specific.
It's specific.
Yeah.
Would that work?
Can I say that the privacy screen, if you imagine it, it will have to be 3 to 3.5 metres high to be clear of, because it's the second level we're talking about. And I've already addressed the fact that we're going to put obscure glass. My suggestion would be that clause 3 be changed to just say, and it'll be clear for everyone then, to be just obscure glass windows on the southern side of units 8, 9 and 10.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And if, as long as
Only for level 2, I say that.
For level 2.
Level 2.
Yeah.
And can I
So
just
is
add-
that 1.7 metres from the finished floor level of?
No, it's no, I don't
you want-
think dimension
don't
comes
need
out.
that. Okay.
I think all you need to say is that the windows on level 2 of units 8, 9 and 10 are all to be obscure glass.
Okay. So, and for all windows, not just the bedroom window?
That's correct. Well, they have to for toilets and bathrooms anyway.
Yeah, so you said south facing windows.
Yes.
Would you like to comment on that, Chantel?
If the applicant is agreeable, that's perfectly fine to amend that condition.
So through the Chair, would you like me to read that
Yes,
condition out?
thank you.
Yeah, so now we've got privacy screen consisting of obscure glazing on the southeast or southern elevation for all windows for unit 8, 9 and 10 on the first floor, second level but first floor.
Okay,
was ground floor, first floor. And then it's following up unchanged from there. It says a privacy screen and we'll delete wall. So it's a privacy screen, must be constructed and finished. We need to get rid of this part where it says solid or translucent materials to prevent overlooking. So, and then it says the privacy screen must remain in situ for the duration of the use.
what about that advice?
Second part, well, that will ensure that the obscure glazing at a minimum would only have 25% transparency, because you can get different types of obscure glazing. It can be patterned or frosted or the like, and some of those are more obscure than others. So if we put a test in there that there's at least, well, it's saying at the moment no more than 25%, but we could, so that would allow light through. We could increase that if we wanted the window to be more obscure. Does the applicant have a response to that?
Well, I think normal obscure glass that we put in bathrooms and bedrooms are adequate because it can't see through it, but it does provide the light.
So at least 25%? Or?
Yep, I think at least would be appropriate.
Okay. So you still want to start it with privacy screen consisting of obscure glazing?
Yeah.
Privacy screen consisting of?
Obscure glazing on the southeast elevation for all windows for unit 8, 9 and 10 on the first floor. Which is the second level.
First floor.
Level 2.
Yes.
Does that need to be made clear, or
It can be either way, it's the same, means the same thing, so it can be either. We can do second level if that's what the committee wants.
or maybe first floor in brackets level 2?
Okay.
So there's no ambiguity. Okay. And then what about the bit where it says advice, the privacy screen may consist of obscure glass in the window? Does that become redundant?
It does become redundant, or we could change may to must, or it just rule it out altogether.
Yeah, take it out, keep it simple. I think so. Okay. So are you comfortable with that? Yep, and the applicant's comfortable with that? So that becomes condition 3 of the recommendation. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So any further questions from authority members?
Just a comment, if I may. It's wonderful to see the applicants and the representatives be able to communicate like this and move on. It's just appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a recommendation before us that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 21 Coleman Street, Moona, subject to 12 conditions that are outlined in the recommendation there. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Move to Alderman Dunsby, someone to second, Alderman Ryan, Alderman Dunsby.
Yes, thank you. I think we've had good information put before us with this, and I echo the comments of the Deputy Mayor. It is good to hear that people can work together and get some compromise, and that will going forward. It's really pleasing to hear that. Sometimes we hear people with brick walls up, but there's no communication, so I appreciate both parties in that particular area. I'm happy with the recommendation as put before it. I'll throw over to my fellow colleagues for further comment.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to thank the applicants too, because as we all know, we keep saying we need more housing. And so it's great to see that we've got this development of quality housing. I also agree with the Deputy Chair that I've never seen Coleman Street that empty. But greater density is something that we're going to have to live with. We need more houses. So yeah, I'm happy with the new conditions. I'm happy to support this application.
Thank you, Alderman Ryan. Any further discussion?
Covered it beautifully.
Excellent. I too speak in support of the recommendation. I've driven past this site a number of times and thought, oh, well, I would love to see some development occur there. So I'm really grateful to see this happening, and to hear that the quality is really important to you as well, in keeping with the rest of the street. So I'm happy to speak in support of this application. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Dunsby. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the committee have determined the application and varied their officer's recommendation condition 3 as discussed. The applicant and the representatives will be notified of that decision and will have 14 days to appeal that decision if they choose to, and the development cannot commence until the end of the period.
Thank you. Thank you to our representatives and applicants for being here too. And I do note you don't have to stay for the rest of the meeting. You're more than welcome to, but if your item's been heard and you wish to get home for dinner, we completely understand. So feel free to leave whenever you please. We won't think you're being rude. Moving on to item 8 then. Proposed use and development for a single dwelling at 25 Christopher Close, Granton. And our planning officer is Roy. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the proposal for is use and development for a single-storey dwelling of 387 metres squared, 3 patios of 156 metres squared, 15 metres squared and 13 metres squared, as well as a shed of 216 metres squared, making a total site coverage of 787 metres squared. The maximum height is 5.17 metres at the dwelling itself, while the proposed shed is a maximum of 4.85 metres. The proposal is a minimum of 19.6 metres from the frontage to the west at Christopher Close, 5.5 metres from the south side boundary, 10 metres from the rear boundary, and 64.2 from the north side boundary. Slide 2, please. This is the subject site on the western side of Christopher Close, which is 186 metres from the intersection with Glenhope Road. The site has an irregular shape with a frontage of 99 metres, depth of 77 to 102 metres, and an area of over 1 hectare, 1.024. The site has a gentle slope running from the southwest to the northeast with an average gradient of 1 in 10. And slide 3. The site is zoned rural living zone in pink and future urban zone orange to the west. Sorry, to the east. Okay, and slide 4 with the discretions. There are 3 discretions and associated performance criteria. 11.4.1 at P1 arises because the site coverage is proposed at 787 metres squared. The acceptable solution allows 400 metres squared. So regarding the performance criteria between A to F, the site coverage is considered to be consistent with established properties in the area, noting in particular a nearby site opposite has a site coverage of 1200 metres squared. That's to the west, the other side of Christopher Close. Discretion at 11.4.2 regarding building height, setback and siting arises because the setback from the frontage is 19.6 metres and the acceptable solution provides 20 metres. Regarding the performance criteria, points A to E, the proposed buildings are considered to be compatible with the character of the area. Third discretion here, 11.4.2, again is regarding building height, setback and siting. That arises as the south side boundary is proposed at 5.5 metres. So regarding the performance criteria here at A to F, proposed buildings are considered to not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties. Slide 5 shows a view to the northeast. Slide 6 shows a view to the south. And slide 7, a view to the west. Then slide 8 outlines 3 representations, which I've separated into 5 general points. Number 1, building dogman form arises due to the representative having an impression of one large black form being proposed and would like to have more open space between the dwelling and the outbuilding to reduce the visual bulk. So in response, I've noted that the revised plans, which came to us after the advertising window of 14 days and were shown to the representatives, show the proposed dwelling would be separated to the shed by 10.2 metres. However, it's not a planning matter in itself. The closest point that I've discussed in the report at development standards for buildings and works would be about site coverage. Regarding point 2, the outbuilding setback from the side and rear boundaries, the representatives were concerned that the shed setback to the south side and rear east boundary would be less than 10 metres and would like the shed's location changed to being towards the northwest. So I have discussed that in the development standards for buildings and works section of the report, and I've noted that the revised plans which came in increased the setbacks at the rear to 10 metres, which would meet the acceptable solution, and the side boundary to 5.5. Point 3, the tree viability near the proposed shed and the removal or damage to that tree. Representatives were concerned about the tree close to the side and rear boundary and that the shed may damage it, and that one tree would be removed for the driveway that is not mentioned on the application form itself. So consideration of the tree close to the outbuilding has been made in the revised plans by the applicant by extending the setback, as I mentioned before. However, it's not a planning matter within the scope of the Tasmanian Planning Scheme Glenorchy for the purposes of this application, and that applies to the tree being removed for the driveway as well. Point 4, the colour of the dwelling and the shed not being harmonious with the surrounds. My comment is that specific colours are not development standards in themselves in the rural living zone. However, the appearance of the dwelling and the outbuilding, with specific consideration given to colours and light reflectance, was made by the applicant in the revised plans. And a similar matter of building form is discussed in the report at development standards for residential buildings and works. Point 5 was a question whether the outbuilding will be subservient to the dwelling. The response post advertising from the applicant was that it definitely will be a subservient outbuilding and residential in use. So in summary, the proposal is recommended for approval subject to 5 conditions.
Thank you, Roy. Do authority members have any questions for Roy? No. We have the applicant here, Mr. Gray Walker. Would you like to address the authority this evening? No, we don't have any representatives here this evening. You are a representative? Oh, sorry, but
It's just pure coincidence of my daughter's residence, so I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay,
So I
sure.
didn't think I had to register twice.
Oh, right, no worries, yeah, no worries.
Yes, my main concern was really the size and bulk of the total development, and the main concern was the shed. It's an industrial size shed, really close to our shared boundary. I think they're proposing now 5.5 metres to our shared boundary. I'm querying why the need for the discretion when you're on a 1 hectare or over a 1 hectare site. The other is our shared boundary is 78.5 metres long, so the proposed development is going to stretch from the 20 metre front boundary setback to the 10 metre rear boundary setback. So the development covers the total shared possible area, but we do share. So my concern is the size and bulk of the shed. It's it's that close to the boundary, it looks like a, you know, 4.3, I think, out of the ground, you know, tin fence, which is, you know, as far as my amenity, it sort of concerns me. To me, I think an acceptable solution would to move the shed, move it up towards the front boundary considerably, so the total development doesn't cover, you know, the total of our possible shared boundary. If the shed was moved up the length of what's proposed now, it'd be partly covered by the house, or it'd cover the house, so the total you know, visual and bulk of it is sort of takes into account the house as well. But I just find, you know, to take it, you know, over the total area is a little bit unacceptable for me.
Sure, thank you. So Mr. Walker, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes, you're a representative. Sorry, I thought you were the applicant to start with, but quite clearly it became clear you weren't. Roy, are you able to address in relation to the shed? From what I understand, you said revised plans increase the setbacks of the shed, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
It's only marginal, very marginal. And, you know, I'd say too, but the setback should be taken from the retaining wall and not the shed, because the retaining wall is an engineered structure. And, you know, the boundary should be taken from, the retaining wall on the deepest cut is 1.7 deep, plus or minus. It's a bit hard off their measurements to determine just what it is, but it's roughly 1.7. So all the boundary should be taken from the, in my opinion, from the retaining wall.
Are you able to explain why that's not the case, Roy? The planning scheme doesn't require that?
To measure the setback from the retaining wall.
Yes.
It is correct to measure from the retaining wall to the boundary. Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. And if you look at the view of our shared boundary there, you can appreciate that, you know, the total development is going from one boundary at 20 metres to the other boundary at 10 metres. If that shed was pushed up, it'll be, you know, it's the total impact is not as great on our amenity.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So if it should be measured from the retaining wall, why isn't it?
I've mentioned it from the shed itself because that's a building, and the performance criteria 11.4.2 is about building height, setback and siting. If you are strictly measuring the setback, you could correctly say that you can measure from the retaining wall. But because 11.4.2 is about building height, setback and siting, I've measured in my description from the building, the shed.
So the shed is, or the garage is 19.6 metres from the frontage, and the acceptable solution is not less than 20 metres. Is that right?
The frontage, yes, it's proposed at 19.6.
Yeah, but we're talking about the side, aren't we?
And the south side boundary, I think would be the most sensitive interface.
Yeah, I'm querying, when you're on a 1 hectare site, the need to have it reduced from 10 metres.
Not less than 10 metres. So this one will be 5.5 to 7.5 if we're talking about the building, but not from the retaining wall is a different story.
Also, you mentioned, I think you mentioned the property opposite with a large site coverage. If I could just mention, that was the original farm house and shed. So, you know, that was going back, you know, when it was, you know, was a farm, not a rural living area. So that was subdivided. So, you know, I don't really think it's fair to use that as an example, the site coverage.
Have you had any discussions with the owner of the property about your concerns?
No, I haven't. I thought they'd come to me, actually. I had a very informal phone discussion, but I think that was more of a fishing expedition than a discussion about the development.
And Roy, the owners would have been aware of the concerns raised through the representation, is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yep, okay. Okay.
Could I ask you, oh, sorry. Could I ask one more question with site coverage? If the site coverage of the proposed development was increased in the future, would that make any difference to your decision?
I don't think I can answer that. I can't answer how I would decide something in the future. So.
I have a question for you. I may have got confused where we were talking about an outbuilding and we're talking about a shed as well. Are they the same thing or not the same thing?
Yeah, for the purposes of the scheme, the definition of an outbuilding includes a garage, a shed and a carport.
Okay, so the outbuilding you were referring to on the slide earlier said that it was going to be livable? It was going to be living quarters? No?
No.
No, okay, so the shed is just a shed. It's not, they're not going to live in it. Okay.
Yep.
So in other applications where area is much tighter, we often rely on acceptable solutions of discretion because there's just no room to manoeuvre. But in this case, there's a lot of room. It's a big block. So why do we have to go, oh, yeah, we'll let him go over the line a bit? Why can't we just say, no, you've got plenty of room. You have to have the whole setback.
Yeah, I wouldn't phrase it that you have to approve it. I think that's, yeah, your decision-making ability.
But why is that your recommendation? Obviously, the information provided in response to Alderman Ryan's question is that it complies with the performance criteria to be, so yes, acceptable solutions are one thing, but performance criteria are also you know, one's not superior to the other, if you like. They're just two different ways of assessing an application.
Yeah, okay. So I've recommended that it be approved because I think it's able to be supported, and I would look at this as that it should not be refused because it's able to be approved.
Through you, Chair, if I could just add some words to that. Yes. So for every applicable standard, there are two tests to comply with the objective, which the objective is the standard. If a proposal doesn't meet the acceptable solution, then we do automatically turn to the performance criteria, and that's often a more flexible way to look at an assessment because the acceptable solution is generally a one-size-fits-all solution. So the performance criteria gives more flexibility to the owner of the land to design their development within that context. The threshold test for this primarily is talking about being compatible with the character of the area, and that's looking back through the report just quickly now. Other words are used like being consistent with the established properties and the like. For the building and height and setbacks for P2, where it specifically says compatible with the character of the character of the area is rural living, so it is designed to be on larger lots. Generally, you have larger dwellings as a result of that, and it can't accommodate multiple dwellings easily or at all. And so outbuildings are generally have been approved in that area. So when you look at the aerial, which is up on the screen at the moment, there are a series of rather large houses with large sheds in the locality. So it's reasonable to argue that it is compatible with that that's established, and we would be taking into account every property and not excluding any as a result of that assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vanessa. Does that provide a bit more context?
Yeah, I'm not arguing the shed. I'm arguing I think there should be some negotiation in the location of it because of the visual impact. This is not like a little shed, it's a 220 square metres, including the roof. It's sticking up in the air, 4.7 at the highest point, and it's very close, even if it's 10 metres, when I'm looking down on it, it's like a huge metal colour-bond fence. So, what I'm asking council for is some discretion to push the shed up. So, I'm not looking over the total boundary of a development.
Sure.
So, I'm prepared to negotiate on.
Okay, Mr. Aarons, I know you said your
Okay,
daughter is the owner, so.
So this is a semi-rural block of quite large size, but it has a 20-metre easement running right through the middle of it at the bottom so the building envelope is reasonably small compared to the size of the block. So Mr. Walker has asked us to move has asked my daughter to move the shed, and they have. They've also changed the colours to move the shed to where it moves the shed completely away from the house. It's a low-set house. So they could have built a double-storey house where Mr. Walker would be looking straight into a much larger structure. The shed will house caravans and a boat, and also have a small workshop. The son-in-law is an electrician. He won't be working from there, but it'll have a small workshop, just a handyman workshop. So it's an awkward block to build a house on. This is their second house. They built one before, and they're moving out rurally on a considerably large block, but small building envelope. So they've had to try and make it all work as best they can. They have moved the shed to try and have less impact on it. I guess again, it's a small building envelope on a large block, and there are other sheds in the area that, if you have a look at one of the photos before, you can see a great big zinc shed, that's visible from the. So they've changed the colours, and the colours originally that were put in were not what they were going to do. They didn't realise it, but they've changed the colours to try and make it as low impact as possible, including the shed, which has got a low impact colour.
Thank you, Mr. Aarons.
Could I just say something again?
One more thing, yes?
Could you bring up the total footprint of the block again?
Was it that you wanted to see, sorry?
No, it doesn't show the whole block.
No, there's the aerial view.
Yeah, no, you should have a view where it shows the whole block with the easement running through it.
I don't think that was part of this presentation. It would be in the attachments that the Aldermen have in the agenda, the full site plan.
I could have one if I could present it. Who do I show it to? Sorry.
Alderman.
It's a bit hard to see, but this shows the footprint of the whole block, and there's the 20-metre easement running through there. There's a location on the bottom side of that easement where a 20-metre by 11-metre shed can fit quite comfortably, and you've got lots. It's not combined with the house. It doesn't have as big a footprint then, and it can quite easily fit. So I think there's a number of choices here that council could make, without having such a big impact on, my amenity.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Okay, any further questions from authority members?
So my understanding is that actually we don't have the flexibility to impose conditions without the applicant's approval anyway. Is that correct? So we perhaps don't have the freedom, sir, that you expect we might have on these issues, unfortunately. That's my understanding anyway.
Is that correct, Vanessa? That's correct, yes. Thank you, Alderman Fraser. So we have a recommendation before us. There's no further questions. I have someone to move that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of 25 Christopher Close, granted subject to the following 5 conditions as outlined in our report. Move, Deputy Mayor. Someone to second. Alderman Fraser. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate Mr Walker's concerns, but as Alderman Fraser pointed out, we don't, and our planning officer Vanessa's confirmed, we don't have a lot of room to move, or if any of that matter. This fits, the proposal fits in the scheme of things, and so I'll leave it open to the fellow Alderman to discuss anything further they want to.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Fraser.
Yeah, look, I'm very empathetic to the argument that, why would discretions be necessary on such a large block? And I hear that there is an easement running through the middle of the property, but the reality is, as the planning officers just said, that the performance criteria are not necessarily a backstop. They are just an alternative way of finding a solution to put a property on a piece of land. They're not necessarily a lesser or a lower criteria for, if that's the right word to use. So this application meets the performance criteria, and therefore, as a member of the planning authority, I feel obligated to approve it.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion of the item? We'll go back to the mover, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Look, as Alderman Fraser said, I feel the same, that we're obligated to approve it, and approve it as per is before us with the conditions that have been listed.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. Is your hand up, Alderman Ryan? No. That's Alderman Fraser, Alderman Dunsby, Deputy Mayor and Mayor Thomas. Please raise your hand if you're against. That is Alderman Ryan. The recommendation is carried. Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the Planning Authority have determined the application and it has been approved as recommended. And the representative and the applicant will receive notification and have 14 days to appeal that decision if they choose to, and the development can't commence until the end of that appeal period.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for attending. Moving on to item 9. Proposed use and development of an outbuilding residential at 28 Chardonnay Drive, Berrydale. And Roy, again, is our planning officer. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the proposal is for a use and development for an outbuilding at 28 Chardonnay Drive, Berrydale. The outbuilding would have a gross floor area of 54 metres squared, the maximum height of 4.3 metres above natural ground level. It would be located behind the existing building to the front boundary, and 0.5 metres setback from the north side boundary. Slide 2 shows us the subject site located on the east side of Chardonnay Drive, approximately 47 metres north of the intersection with Shiraz Court. The site has a total area of 728 metres squared, with a frontage of 24.5 metres and a depth between 28.5 and 29.4 metres. The site slopes down from the frontage towards the east, the rear boundary, at an average gradient of 1 in 10. And I've noted that the site is steeper in the location of the proposed outbuilding itself at the northwest, where the gradient reaches approximately 1 in 5 for the first 5 metres of the frontage. Slide 3 is showing that the subject site is in the general residential zone. And slide 4 is illustrating that the proposal relies upon one discretion at 10.4.2, site coverage at P3 arises as the proposed outbuilding of 9 metres in length, plus the retaining wall to the sides at 4.4 metres at the north elevation, whereas the acceptable solution would allow for a wall length of 9 metres. And here it's proposed, as I mentioned previously, with a 0.5 metre setback to that side boundary. Regarding the performance criteria, at points A to C of 10.4.2 P3, It's considered that the siting and scale of the outbuilding is not causing an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties. It's considered to provide separation between dwellings on adjoining properties that is compatible with that existing on established properties in the area, and that it will not cause an unreasonable reduction in sunlight to an existing solar energy installation. Slide 5 is showing the view to the east. Slide 6 is the view to the north. And slide 7 is the view to the south. Slide 8 outlines that one representation was received on 3 points that I've separated. First one, regarding building size, height and bulk, is that the representor is concerned about the intrusion on outlook that would be caused by the size and height of the proposal. And in response, I've noted that the application is relying on performance criteria as a result of the wall being within 1.5 metres of the shared side boundary for a length of more than 9 metres. So the retaining wall attached to the outbuilding extends that wall length to 13.4 metres, although the building itself is 9 metres in length. Regarding the height of the outbuilding, it's within the building envelope. That's going up vertically 3 metres from natural ground level at the side boundaries and in at 45 degrees to a maximum height of 8.5 metres. And I've discussed this in the report at the development standards for residential buildings and works. Second point, regarding the setback from the front boundary being less than others in the street. The representor submitted that the setbacks proposed are 5.5 metres from the frontage. That the setback is proposed at 3.5, but other setbacks in the street are 5.5. So my comment is that the revised plans have increased that front setback from 3.5 to being 4.5 to 5, which meets the acceptable solution of the standard, in particular as it is behind the existing building line. Point 3, the setback from the side boundary. The representative is concerned about the siding being 0.5 metres from the shared side boundary to the north, and that it would cause a closed-in effect on the neighbouring property. My comment is discussed in the report at the development standards for residential buildings and works. And the fourth point, the location of the building and that a preferred location can be found elsewhere on the site. My response is that it's not a planning matter in itself. In this Glenorchy interim planning scheme 2015 that this was assessed under, the location, as I've described in the report, is assessed as meeting the acceptable solution regarding the front setback, as well as meeting the performance criteria on the side boundary setback. So overall, the proposal is recommended for approval, subject to 4 conditions.
Thank you, Roy. Do the planning authority members have any questions for Roy at this stage? No? I believe we have Mr. Earl Johnston here, who's a representative. Would you like to address the authority, Mr. Johnston?
Thank you. I live at 30 Chardonnay Drive, next door to this development. On my northern boundary, I think I have probably an inappropriate development there of a 3-storey house that was built some 30 years ago, and that shades my property for about 4 months of the year. So on my southern boundary, where the proposed development is, there was an open view, and I had a lovely view of Mount Wellington. The original proposal was for an 11-metre shed with a 37-degree pitch, which blocked my view of the mountain fairly completely. However, that's been amended now to a 9-metre shed with a 25-degree pitch and a setback which has increased slightly. But I think those amendments are fairly cosmetic and they don't address the problem. To me, my loss of amenity is fairly large. I think it's important that I have an open area on the southern side, and I don't think the proposed changes have gone far enough. Now, I believe there are alternatives there, and one alternative which wouldn't be ideal but would be acceptable was that if the roof of the shed was flat, that is a pitch of say 1 in 50, that would be acceptable to me. And really, because it's a garage, I don't really see any reason why that couldn't be possible. The other alternative, and it's the one which the neighbours around there favour, that is the lady over the street and the guy next door and so on, is to put the garage in line with the house. And in that case, I wouldn't have a problem with whatever height they wanted to put on it. They can come right over to my boundary. In fact, it can form part of the boundary. And to me and to our neighbours, that would be easier to access instead of where the proposed development is. In summary, I don't think my loss of amenity has been given enough emphasis, and I think that the development in its present form should not be permitted because there are, to me, viable alternatives.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. I don't believe we have the applicant here this evening, am I right? We don't have the applicant here. Have you had any conversations with the applicant about your concerns? Have you had any conversations with your neighbour about these concerns?
Sadly, no. I respect their privacy. If they don't want to discuss it, then there's nothing I can do about that.
I just wondered if, you know, the alternatives you've raised with your neighbours or with your other neighbours across the road have been discussed with the applicant. That's all. Roy, is there anything there you'd like to address in response?
Well, definitely your concerns have been forwarded to the applicant. I can say that much as far as correspondence goes. The standard we're talking about at 10.4.2 does consider any loss of amenity, but the wording itself is that it not cause an unreasonable loss of amenity to adjoining properties, having regard to those points that go underneath that. So I can see what you mean, that you could argue that there's a loss of amenity, but given that it states an unreasonable loss of amenity cannot be caused, I think there's a description, and my assessment has discussed that as far as possible to address your concerns. The performance criteria itself sets out points from A1, 2, and to 3 about the reduction of sunlight and overshadowing or point A4, the visual impacts caused by the apparent scale, bulk, proportions of the dwelling when viewed from an adjoining property. And given the wording of that performance criteria, the word or gives, in my view, an equal kind of weighting to those points, 1 to 3 or 0.4. When I've looked at the potential for overshadowing, especially for points 1 to 3, I see a minimal overshadowing effect. Similarly, the visual impacts of A4, as far as the scheme goes, when it describes a building envelope, it's not exceeding that building envelope. And I think that it's not causing an unreasonable loss of amenity on that point either, at A4. And I've looked through the rest of that standard at 10.4.2B and C. And yeah, I've considered it as far as I can.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Any follow-up questions from Planning Authority members? And we have a recommendation that a permit be granted for the proposed use and development of an outbuilding residential at 28 Chardonnay Drive, Berriedale, subject to 4 conditions. Do I have someone to move the recommendation? No?
Oh.
Deputy Mayor, someone to second? Alderman Dunsby, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. We've had a fairly good explanation. This is difficult as it is. The planning officer tells us that it fits. It may not fit emotionally, but it fits, and we understand, appreciate the representative's concerns, Mr. Johnston's concerns. So I'll open it up to my fellow aldermen for further discussion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion of the item? I too appreciate the concerns you raise, and it certainly puts us in a difficult position when we are confronted with a representative who's quite concerned about the impact of a development on their property. But we are here not necessarily wearing our elected member hats, but wearing our Glenorchy Planning Authority hats as a statutory role that we perform separate to our role as elected members, and often where we can hear concerns and want to advocate for our community members we represent, we have difficulty doing that in this particular role. We are bound to assess applications as to whether or not they meet the acceptable solutions or the performance criteria, the standards that the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act and the Glenorchy Planning Scheme set out. And as we've heard tonight from our planning officer, he has assessed the merits of the application and determined that the siting and scale of the dwelling, which you're particularly concerned about, won't cause an unreasonable loss of amenity, considering the 4 criteria there. Therefore, I'm bound to support the recommendation before us. Go back to the mover, Deputy Mayor King.
No, nothing further, Mayor. Thank you.
Put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here?
Thank you. Thank you, Roy.
Chair, so the Planning Authority have just decided the application and it's been approved. The applicant and the representative will be notified of that decision and will have 14 days to appeal that decision, and the development cannot commence until the end of that appeal period.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. No worries. Moving on to item 10, combined planning scheme amendment and planning permit application request to rezone 26A Tregear Street, Moona to an inner residential zone and construct multiple dwellings for PLAM 2102.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes, Deputy Mayor will be excused. So we have a report before us, and our Senior Strategic Planner, Lyndall Byrne, will present the report to us tonight.
Thank you. So
This is a request for a combined planning scheme amendment and rezoning, combined with a development application for model dwellings on the site. So I'll just break the report presentation up into the planning scheme amendment first, and then a discussion about the planning permit, and then summarise the next steps in the process after that. One thing that the GPA may note that because this is an amendment which is to our local provision schedule, you may kind of just be aware that some of the sections are different from many other planning scheme amendments that you've recently seen, and some of the terminology is different as well. So instead of using the term initiate, it's now prepare. So it's just because it's under a different section of the Act. So the request is to look at this site-specific site of 26A Tregear Street, which is currently in a community purpose zone, and seeking to change that zoning to in a residential zone. From a local policy context, this does fit well with Council's strategic plan, and also with the precinct plan actions under the Greater Glenorchy plan, where those policies seek to encourage and increased housing, which the zoning change would facilitate. The Greater Glenorchy plan also seeks to encourage the ability to have increased residential density close to activity centres. So this site it's on the edge, like it's a little bit over 800 metres from the Moona Activity Centre, but it's well located next to the Springfield Metropolitan Interchange and Main Road. So it would facilitate an opportunity for increased housing on the site. From a regional strategy perspective, it's also within the kind of nominated densification area, nominated under the Southern Tasmanian Regional Land Use Strategy, so seeking to include the site in a residential zone is consistent with the policy positions under that strategy. The site is fully serviced, so it's consistent with the regional strategy in that regard, because we're not then seeking to include unserviced land within the urban growth boundary to rezone that. And it also kind of, I guess, from the perspective of supporting or not being inconsistent with the strategies around social infrastructure, while the community purpose zone and the existing church on the site would technically be lost. The site hasn't been used for those purposes since 2018. So bringing the opportunity for more residential development into that site may well provide support for other facilities in the locality. So it's considered that it can be considered to be generally consistent with those policy statements around social infrastructure. It also meets the objectives in Schedule 1 of LUPA. It's promoting the sustainable and orderly development through more efficient use of underutilised serviced urban land. And it's also considered to be consistent with the relevant state policies. It is considered that the zoning change meets the statutory requirements that are identified under Section 32 of LUPA, and will provide an opportunity for increased housing in an area close to our activity centres. So from the amendment side of things, the request is supported. With respect to the second part, so the development is, sorry, I probably should have included some photos there of the site. And these really relate to the planning permit application and the discretions that the application raises. So there are 4 discretions with the application. Just of note that the existing church is to be retained and converted into a 5-bedroom dwelling, and then 3 new dwellings are to be constructed on the site. They're all double-storey. The development proposal provides 2 car parking spaces for each dwelling, and also a visitor space on site. And all of the dwellings have adequate private open space provided. So there are 4 discretions relating to the proposal. The first one relates to the building envelope, so setback and building envelope for all dwellings. Portion of the unit, the upper level of Unit 3 protrudes vertically into the building envelope by approximately 300 millimetres. So that actually triggers an assessment against the performance criteria. So looking at the development as a whole and considering the performance criteria, key things to note in respect to that, what kind of impacts the proposal might have on reduction in sunlight to habitable rooms of a dwelling on an adjoining property, the height and the rear and side setbacks for the development have all been achieved. So the only overshadowing that occurs will be from the 3 new dwellings, and that's likely to fall across the roof form of the existing hall. So there's not going to be an increased overshadowing onto properties outside of the site. The other elements in the performance criteria relate to like built form and overall kind of separation, and how separation on the development site and whether that's consistent with separation of buildings in the vicinity. So the built form of the 3 new dwellings does provide for separation between those dwellings, and there's also a mix of materials and finishes that are proposed. So that does help to break up the bulk of the development proposal. The setbacks, particularly from the rear and side, have been achieved in respect to the building envelope. And when you look at the surrounding character of the area, most dwellings in Tregear Street are either have a side setback of about 3 metres, and then the other side is about 1 to 2 metres. So the 3 metres generally allows for the access and driveway. This proposal abuts council's walkway into the adjoining reserve, so that also creates in Johnson Street, so that also creates additional kind of separation between the adjoining property and the new development. So it's considered to meet the performance criteria. The second discretion relates to site coverage and private open space. So in this regard, the acceptable solution requires dwelling to have an area of open space of 24 metres squared with a minimum horizontal dimension of 4 metres. However, the new dwellings only have a minimum dimension in their open space of 3 metres. So looking at the performance criteria, the key things there are that the open space is conveniently located in relation to a living area, and it's orientated to take advantage of sunlight. The open space areas are on the northern side of these new dwellings, and also on the northern side of the existing dwelling. There's also quite an ample amount of open space around each of the dwellings, so it's not just the open space that's going to be used for storing bins and clotheslines as well. So there's an adequate area of open space for each of the dwellings, even though the secluded private open space only has that minimum 3 metre dimension. So given the orientation and the location, all open space can be accessed off the living rooms of these dwellings. It's considered that the proposal meets that standard through the performance criteria. The third discretion relates to privacy of all dwellings. So in this instance, the acceptable solution requires windows to be set back not less than 4 metres from a rear boundary and not less than 6 metres from the open space of another dwelling on the same site. So the rear boundary setback is for the eastern elevation windows of Unit 3 is 3.1 metres, so it doesn't meet that acceptable solution provision. However, the area to the north is the council reserve at 21A Johnson Street. So there's going to be well, on a positive note, it's a good opportunity to have overlooking which occur over a recreational area because it encourages casual surveillance. So it's considered that that will form an advantage for the development proposal. With respect to the units 1, 2 and 3, they're the new units. The upper levels of each of those units have the potential to look down into the private open space of the adjoining dwelling because they're not separated 6 metres from that private open space. So the applicant and I have discussed an opportunity to minimise that overlooking, and we agree that a condition can actually be applied to the permit to require a vertical louver blade privacy screen adjacent to the upper level windows, corresponding to the adjacent private open space areas of units 1, 2 and 3. And this design solution will restrict the overlooking to adjoining open space while still providing visual amenity to the occupants of those new dwellings. So it's considered with that condition that the applicable standard can be met through the performance criteria. The final discretion relates to frontage fences for all dwellings. So with respect to the height of the private open space area fence for Unit 1, it's a solid fence to 1.8 metres in height. So under the inner residential zone, all fences within 4.5 metres of the frontage are required to be not more than 1.2 metres in height if solid, or up to 1.8 metres in height if they are at least 30% transparent above 1.2 metres. So this fence is actually designed to provide privacy for the secluded open space of that unit number 1, and looking within the streetscape, while most front fences in that Tregear streetscape are quite low, there are some fences that sit in line with the building line of those existing dwellings that are higher. So it is considered that given that the fence will provide adequate kind of privacy and security for that dwelling for Unit 1, and that it can be considered to be generally consistent with the fences within the streetscape, noting that it is in line with the building line. It's not sitting forward of the development proposal, that it would meet that acceptable, applicable standard, and can be and can be supported. So Taswater have been asked to comment on both the planning scheme amendment and the development application. That they indicated no objection to the planning scheme amendment, the rezoning, and they've supported the development application subject to conditions. So it's recommended that the amendment be approved, and then subsequently that the it's recommended that the amendment be prepared, and that the development application could also be supported subject to conditions, so that a planning permit could be granted as well. So if the GPA are in mind to support that, then the next steps in the process are that the planning scheme amendment and the development application would be placed on public exhibition for a period of 28 days. If there are any representations received, then those will need to come back to the GPA to be considered, and there's opportunity for modifications to occur, or for the GPA to determine that they do not support either the planning scheme amendment or the planning permit, having considered the content of those representations. Following that, then all the representations and all the information would be forwarded onto the Tasmanian Planning Commission, and the Tasmanian Planning Commission will make a decision about the amendment.
Thank you. Any questions for Lyndall?
Yes,
Ryan.
I do. So just say for a minute that there's no objections or representations are filed when the draft amendment is advertised or put on exhibition for 28 days. And after that 28 days, it goes to the Tasmanian Planning Commission for approval.
Correct.
Yep. So that isn't automatic. I mean, probably they will approve it, or they will approve it.
Yeah, we can't kind of preempt their decision. So they go back through and they look at, they basically revisit the planning scheme amendment. Does it stack up against all the LPS criteria? They will look at the planning permit application. Again, does that stack up against the planning scheme, and look at the discretions and assessment. So they will again make their decision based on the information before them, and they could potentially say, no, we don't support the planning scheme amendment, and refuse it.
Okay, so with recommendation C, it's recommended that we agree to grant a permit, and the wording is different from normal, where we normally say that a permit be granted. So we're being asked to agree to grant a permit in the future, but shouldn't that be subject to the approval of the amendment by the Tasmanian Planning Commission, as well as the conditions identified in the report?
So the planning scheme amendment and the permit, if you choose to support those and agree to grant, if you agree to prepare the planning scheme amendment tonight, you would also then be asked whether you agree to grant the planning permit tonight as well. So the decision that is made tonight is that. Then it goes on exhibition. And then the Tasmanian Planning Commission makes the decision about whether the planning scheme amendment is approved, and they would then reaffirm, if they choose to, the Glenorchy's Planning Authority's decision to grant the permit. It is a weird process because we're, you know, making this kind of, you are making this decision, I guess, in principle, to kind of test the waters of the combined planning permit and the amendment. That's the wording of the kind of act about choosing to grant the permit, even though there's potential for it to come back again if there are representors and revisit some of the issues that revisit some of the discretions in the planning permit, and you may then choose as part of that next step in the process, you may decide that you do not support the granting of the permit in that regard as well. It is a complicated process, but technically the decision is to grant the permit at
Or agree to grant it.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying, because effectively if you read that in isolation, the permit's granted,
Well, we've agreed to grant it in the future.
regardless of whether the amendment goes through.
Yeah.
But the amendment can't go through while it's zoned the way it is. I mean, sorry, the
Yeah, that's
application can't be
right.
granted whilst the zoning is as it is.
Yes, so you have to, sorry, through your chair, you have to make a decision to prepare the amendment.
Yep.
Mm.
And if you don't make it, if your decision is not to prepare the amendment, then the planning permit application can't be granted, lapses.
Yeah, but no, I take your point, Chair, that if the Tasmanian Planning Commission doesn't approve the amendment, then it would have to nullify our agreement to grant the permit.
Yes.
So they must be read together rather than they don't really exist in that. Well, C doesn't exist in isolation to the other. True. But that's not really clear in the wording, is what you're perhaps saying. Because it says subject to the conditions, but it doesn't say subject to the amendment being granted.
We can look to change that. I guess that's kind of probably implicit in section 40Y, but that's not clear for you, so we can change that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much of a problem of saying subject to the conditions identified in the report and approval by the Tasmanian Planning Commission.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it would be, what you would be, so you're agreeing to granting the permit, but you're not granting the permit.
Yeah.
Oh,
The commission are granting the permit.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Well, the permit won't kind of be live until the planning commission makes the final decision. So the language in the Act does talk about the planning authority agreeing to grant the permit. But the permit won't actually be theoretical.
But we normally grant the permit. The Tasmanian Planning Commission doesn't normally grant permits.
No,
not
but
necessarily.
they do in this.
They do in this case, okay.
So maybe it is clear, but it says, as you said, in accordance with section 40Y of the land use planning and approves that. So that's where that you're saying it's implicit in there because that's where it sets out.
Yes, if that process that you're going through.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That.
Yeah. Okay.
Happy with that?
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. Any other questions for Lyndall? No, we have a recommendation, 4 recommendations there. Ultimately, that to prepare and certify the amendment, grant the permit and exhibit for 28 days. Do I have someone to move that recommendation? Alderman Dunsby, someone to second. Alderman Ryan, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. In terms of the proposed development, I appreciate the innovation of the repurposing of the original building, and that we're seeing, potentially a 5-bedroom house on offer. So we don't often see those. So that's I appreciate that innovation there, and the addition of the units there too. So we've made good use of this space on that particular block. I understand the process where we have to go through with the 2 areas combined here, and I look forward to hearing back to the positive and depending on the representations. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item?
Just to say, more houses, that's great. So I'm so happy to support.
Yeah, I too am happy to support, as Lyndall outlined, it aligns with the our strategic priorities here in our Greater Glenorchy plan, and as Alderman Ryan said, more housing, and Alderman Dunsby said innovative housing too, and you don't often see 5-bedroom houses, and they're very much needed. So, anything from you, Alderman Fraser?
No.
Okay. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Dunsby.
Nothing further, thank you, Mayor.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Lyndall or Vanessa, would you like to explain the process from here? You sort of already have.
Yeah, I can read it
Yeah,
right
I
back.
think I'll
Okay. We've got it. We're all clear?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. The result is carried. I did say that, didn't I? Carried unanimously. Getting a bit tired, sorry. That is the end of our Planning Authority meeting on Monday, 6th of December. At 7:27 p.m. meeting closed. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us in the gallery today. Thank you to those of you who have joined us online. We shall see you for our next GPA meeting in January. So have a safe and happy Christmas.
Yep, happy Christmas.